Many people dislike philosophy, and not without reason. In its intellectual ambitions, philosophy often goes too far. Sometimes philosophical thinking becomes so abstract that it seems to drift away from the very world it claims to explain. As Schopenhauer once said, philosophy, when it turns into a system, is rarely popular. To outsiders, it looks strange and impractical, like a kind of academic magic whose spells sound impressive simply because no one understands them. Philosophy is supposed to help us understand existence and the world, but the more sophisticated it becomes, the more distant that world can seem. It often feels like philosophers talk about reality as if they don't actually live in it. But there is one philosopher who manages to keep the balance. He reaches exceptional intellectual depth without leaving the world behind. In fact, his entire project moves in the opposite direction. Instead of leading you away from the world, he brings you back to reality itself, and sometimes even disturbingly close. And his name is Martin Heidegger. I want to say that I'm not going to explain Heidegger's whole philosophy here. Instead, I'll try to help you catch the vibe of what he's doing. I could explain the difference between being and beings, summarize Dasein in bullet points, but I don't want to do that, because that wouldn't be real Heidegger, because his philosophy should be experienced, not just academically explained. And even though I'm not giving you a detailed map, I still want to give you just enough of the overall shape of what he's doing, because otherwise it would be impossible to speak about him at all. Heidegger isn't like other philosophers. He doesn't offer new theory like many before him. He questions the ground on which all theories stand. Heidegger's central question is simple, at least at first sight. What does it mean to be? We move through life using words like is and being constantly. We talk about objects, about consciousness, about the world, always already assuming that these things are. Yet we almost never pause to ask what we actually mean when we say that something exists. Because it feels too obvious. We feel like we already understand what being means, even if we can't put it into words. But Heidegger argues that without first clarifying the meaning of being, philosophy can't truly go any further. For him, this question stands at the very beginning of all philosophy. And he believes that starting with Plato, philosophical thought became increasingly focused on the wrong things: ideas, substances, objects, minds, and quietly forgot the more basic question of what it means for anything to be at all. Rather than building another theoretical system on top of inherited ones, Heidegger returns to the most fundamental issue. And in trying to understand what it means to be, he forces us to return to ourselves. Not in a psychological way. Heidegger isn't asking you to examine your feelings. He's pointing to something deeper. We are the ones who already, somehow, understand being. We refer to it constantly, we say things are, we make sense of what exists. And when you want to understand something, you go to whoever already has some understanding of it. So if you truly want to understand what being is, we have to return to the ones who already, in some way, understand it, to ourselves. But Heidegger doesn't talk about humans in the usual sense. He uses the word Dasein, which simply means being there. Because what he is describing isn't a type of creature, it's the kind of being that understands being. So, Dasein is you, but not as a biological or rational animal, rather as the one who already lives in a world that makes sense. And this is where the magic of Heidegger's thought begins. He makes you look at what you've always taken for granted. He wants you to notice your own being, how you exist, how the world shows up for you. Heidegger doesn't want you to explain reality. He asks you to pay attention to how you're already in it. We usually imagine that we start with consciousness, and then from there we perceive objects around us, identify them, name them, and build up a picture of the world. But Heidegger says that long before you think, name, or analyze anything, you are already involved, handling things, moving among them, absorbed in what you are doing. For example, when you're typing, you're not really thinking about the keyboard, you just type. At a certain point, the keyboard disappears from your awareness. You don't even experience yourself as someone using it. You're simply in the act. Same with a cup of tea. You don't sit there thinking, this is a cup, I'm lifting it. It has liquid inside. You just drink, without even thinking about it. And this mode of involvement is the default mode of existence. You live this way almost all the time, even if you never notice it. Even consciousness for Heidegger is a concept built on top of something more basic: involvement. Heidegger also shows that the world isn't a collection of objects. The world is a web of relations and meanings, and you never experience a single object in isolation. You see a car and you already understand roads, traffic, movement. It all shows up as a whole. You don't live among a bunch of objects, you live in a world that comes to you all at once, in its totality of references. And step by step, Heidegger exposes how you really exist in the world. He shows you that you always exist in a mood. You never see the world as a detached observer. You are always already attuned. And this is important. He forces you to rethink something even more basic than objects or perception: time. We're used to thinking about time as a straight line, past, present, future. But we don't actually live that way. If you know your mom is coming over tomorrow, you clean your apartment today. If you have an early meeting, you go to bed earlier. If tomorrow is a day off, you stay up late. In other words, your future shapes your present. And in that sense, your future comes before the present. That's how you live. I'm only describing fragments of his philosophy, so don't try to fully understand it as a system. I'm not trying to teach Heidegger. I'm trying to show you that he isn't the kind of philosopher who builds theories divorced from reality. He points to things you already live but don't usually notice: your relation to objects, your sense of time, the way you move through the world. And it changes you, and that's fascinating, but it's not the most important part of his thinking. The point is not that Heidegger cracks your habitual world, forces you to notice what was always unnoticed, and then leaves you there. No, he teaches you to stay with that openness, even when it feels disturbing. He thinks that if we're ever going to understand being, we have to start here, in life. Whatever answers we're looking for, they're in the world we're already inside. What you have to do is to live in it more clearly. And that approach to philosophy is risky. This kind of thinking comes close to poetry or even mysticism. But Heidegger manages not to go there. He finds a way to describe this raw, lived experience with philosophical precision. And that's what makes him so rare and so strange. And I'm not saying that his writing is easy. Sometimes it's extremely difficult. But it doesn't change the fact that he's brilliant. Heidegger isn't the kind of philosopher who gives you answers or explains everything the way Hegel does, for example. Instead, he gives you a new way of seeing. And yes, his philosophy is deeply unsettling, but that's because Heidegger doesn't want to be understood in the usual academic sense. He wants a shift in how you inhabit your own life. He wants you to feel uncomfortably close to reality. And only then, maybe, you begin to understand what being means. And that's why you need him. Reading him feels like waking up in the middle of your life. And maybe it doesn't sound like something you want, but believe me, this is exactly what you need. Thanks for watching and have a nice day. Bye.